we're going to be covering a few things, just the Python print statement, what a Python variable of string is, the string type anyway. We're going to be covering the Python function of input. This is how you actually get user input from somebody using your script. We're going to be covering the Python string function of string.replace. This is how we are going to replace the placeholders in the template with user input. We're going to cover reading in a file. This is actually how we're going to read our template file to a variable that we can modify, and then writing a file. We'll cover actually generating the configuration and then outputting it to a file that can be referenced later. And then after we have kind of introduced all of these concepts, then we're going to define the template, and we're going to make these template changes with user input. We are targeting a iOS device. I have an ASR 901 just kind of sitting in my rack that doesn't really do a whole lot. So that's the device we're going to be targeting. But let's just jump right in and cover these concepts first. So what I'm doing to showcase the code is it's in Jupyter. Generally, Python scripts are just kind of written as .py files, but this is a really hands-on way of showcasing Python programs. So the first concept we want to cover is Python print. So in Python, the print statement is just a way of showing a value in the output. Mostly, more or less, usually a string value. This is what's known as a string. It's just kind of a set of characters that can be special characters. They can be alpha characters. They can be numeric values, right? So if we run this cell, we can see the output here. And that's with the print statement. If you don't use a print statement in Jupyter, you can actually still get the same output. Sorry, I meant to paste right there. But it comes along with this out value. I'll mostly be using the print statement just because this is kind of what you do when you're just starting out with coding, is you'll be using a lot of print statements just to kind of debug your code to make sure your code's actually doing what you want it to do. So we're just going to start with this print statement, and I'm going to clear this block. So yeah, that's what a print statement is. Just kind of shows you a value, right? The next concept is, what is a string? So I already kind of covered this, but a string is basically, it's what this is. It's generally found in between two quotations. They can be single quotes or double quotes, like so. They function the same. And there are reasons that you would use one or the other, but we're not going to get into that either. I mostly standardize on single quotes, actually, when I'm working with strings, but that can also be somewhat of a preference. But yeah, so it can contain, it's a list of characters that can be alpha, numeric, or special symbols. And they all coincide like within these two quotations, okay? So this is a string. Okay, let's define the input function. So if you ever want input from a user, Python has a built-in function called input. And this is a function call right here. So basically you type in input, and then these two parentheses actually let you know that you're calling some type of function. Generally, functions require some parameters to be set. In this case, input is going to want your prompt. I don't know actually if it'll run. Yeah, it runs by itself. So if I actually put something in here, like just what, you can see like basically input took my input and then returned the value that I input. To make this a little bit more clear, let's wrap it in a print statement, and let's give it a prompt. So inside the input parentheses, we can actually add an argument or a parameter that the function is looking for. And the first parameter that this function looks for is the prompt. So we can actually define what the input prompt is going to be. So we can say like, what is your name? Right? You can put a question mark. And so if we look at that, we can see, oh, now we've got this prompt and an input box. But what if we want to assign that to a variable? All right. And all a variable is it's taking some form of data and storing it somewhere for later use, right? So in this case, the form of data is the input that we're requesting from the user, right? So if I run this again, so it's going to say, what is your name? I'm just going to say, it's Dret, right? So it asked me what my name was, and I supplied it. And now we can actually print that value out. We can say, hey, let's print name. And it prints out Dret because Dret is assigned to this variable name. Okay. So that's basics of what user input is. All right, next on the agenda, string.replace. Okay. So let's actually rerun this name. And we're going to do my name is Dret. Exclamation point. Let's print out name again. Okay. So what if I wanted to replace Dret with something else? Strings actually have a function called replace. And so what we assigned to name is actually a string. So this input that I provided is actually what's known as a string type variable. And so now name actually has the type of string. We can actually see this. We can print, hey, what's the type of name? It says, oh, that's a string. With a string, we can actually do something like print name. And then we can do a function call from that string of replace. That's this dot replace. That's a function call. And we're going to do the parentheses again because most functions require some type of parameters that we have to set. And the replace function actually wants two parameters. It wants, what are you going to replace? So I'm going to replace Dret. And what are you going to replace it with? I'm going to say destroyer of worlds. Okay. So if we print this out, now remember what we're doing here. We got the string and we're replacing this value inside the string. So this is the whole string, right? Because we printed the string out. This is the whole string. We're going to be replacing this value inside of the string with this value. Let's see what output we get. My name is destroyer of worlds, exclamation point. See? So that it did exactly what it was supposed to do. It replaced this value with that value. So what's interesting is we didn't actually modify the variable name with this replace statement. We only modified it for this single print statement. So if we actually printed name again, it's still my name is Dret, right? This value, this name value didn't actually change. So if we come in and we can actually modify name, we can go, hey, name equals name dot replace Dret destroyer of worlds. Okay. So what we're doing is we're saying, hey, I want name to equal something else. And what I want it to equal is what it's currently set to, but run this replace function on it. So if we run this, right? So we basically just changed how this works, right? So now if I come in back up to the cell and I print the name again, this shouldn't say my name is Dret anymore. My name is destroyer of worlds, okay? Because we've actually modified what name is, okay? And then if we try to run another replace statement where we replace Dret with something like, something random, right? So now we're doing print name.replace dreth with something random. So this should say my name is destroyer of worlds, because there is no dreth in the string anymore. You can't replace it because the string is actually now my name is destroyer of worlds. So this replace statement isn't going to replace anything, right? So now it's still my name is destroyer of worlds because our replace statement didn't do anything. That is an introduction to replace. And you can see how that would easily be used in kind of like a templating scenario, right? Because a lot of times in templates, you have placeholders and you replace the placeholders with something that you know, okay? All right, next concept. Reading a file. So a lot of times when you're working with templates in Python, you'll actually store the template in its own file. It's like own txt or whatever. It could be XML, it could be JSON, but your template's going to exist kind of in its own file in some folder structure that you've chosen. And so sometimes you got to read in those files. So let's go to my folder structure. I have this data folder and I have this templates folder inside the data folder. And I'm actually going to create a new file real quick. So this is really just going to be an example of reading in a file. We're just going to go example.txt. Okay. So let's go back over to where we are reading in or introducing concepts. And so reading and writing files in Python, it's not like the most intuitive code, but basically it's just with open. And then this open is going to need two parameters. The first parameter is going to be the actual file location. So we're going to target what's called the relative path. And the relative path is the file location relative to where you're running your code. So concept introductions exists in this part 1 basics template folder. And then the template that we actually just created exists in this data templates folder. So relative to concept introductions, we need to go to data templates example.txt. So let's do that. Data templates example.txt. Okay. The second parameter that this function wants is the read-write access of the file. So in order for a second parameter, we're going to put a comma, letting the function know that we are supplying a different parameter now. In this case, I only want to be able to read the file, so I'm just going to do an R. And then we're actually going to do an as f. And what this does is when it opens the file, it's actually going to store the opening of that file to this f variable. And then the colon kind of drops us down into this space where we can interact with the file as it is assigned to variable f. Okay, so what I want to do is I actually want to define a new variable called template, and I want to make it equal to f.read. Okay. And then I'm going to call that read as a function, but I'm not going to supply any parameters because it doesn't need any. So now what you have is you basically have a piece of code that says, hey, I want you to open this file. And while you have that file open, I want you to read it and store it to this template variable. And then once you're done doing that, you can close the file. So let's run this bit of code. Okay. And just like that, that read in the file. And now we can actually look at the contents of example.txt by doing a print template, because remember we assigned that file to this template. Okay. We forgot to save said file. Let's do that real quick. And let's read it in again. And there you go. So now we can see the contents of template, and the contents of template are actually, this is a string. Now it's a string across multiple lines, but it's still a string. Okay. So if we wanted to, we can actually replace one of the values inside of template. Okay. So I'm actually going to create a new variable, and I'm going to make it equal to template. And what this does is it actually makes a copy of template. It doesn't reference template itself. And so I can modify output if I want without modifying template. This isn't a terrible idea, just in case you mess up your template somehow, because you're not modifying your template, you're modifying output, which means you can go back to ground zero if you want, which is just making output equal to template again. Okay, so let's print output real quick so everybody can see that it looks, so everybody can see that it looks the exact same as template, right? Like you can see template up here and you can see output down here. But since output is a string, let's actually run a replace statement or a replace function on it, right? So output's our string. So we're going to do output.replace. We're going to say, hey, what do you want to replace? I'm going to say I want to replace the name placeholder with depth. Okay. So if I run this, the out that it's actually providing is the return of the function that we called. So if we print this, just to make it look a little bit nicer, we can say, oh yeah, look, the name placeholder got replaced. The destroyer placeholder still exists, but notice we didn't actually modify output with this statement. So let's take a look at output again. And you can see output remains the same. So let's actually modify output. And we do that by saying output equals output.replace with the name placeholder and replace it with direct. Okay. So now we run this and we can look at output again. And we can see that the output has actually changed. Okay, but let's do another replacement. And what am I the destroyer of? Let's do networks. Okay, let's run this again. And now let's take a look at output. Okay, so if we look at template, template's still the same, but you can see we use the template to actually replace variables inside of template that we kind of placed. We did this name placeholder and we did this destroy placeholder, and we replaced both of them, one with my name and one with networks. Okay, so we can see kind of how you would go about reading in a template and then modifying it. So that would be reading in a file concept, and then kind of doubling down on replacing the string replace function. So let's look at writing to a file. So writing to a file is pretty much the same as reading to a file, except with your with open command, like we're still going to actually, so I have a different folder for doing outputs. So if we go back, like, remember we're doing relative to where the Python is actually being run. In this case, we're running this Python in this concept introductions Jupyter notebook, which means I want to write to a file that's in data and output. Okay, so there's no files in here currently, but let's write a file to it. So again, relative. So we're going to do data and we're going to do output. And we're just going to say example output.txt. Okay. So remember, it wants another parameter. In this case, we're actually going to do a W for write. Remember before we did an R for read. So the second parameter that it's asking for gives us certain permissions to the file, right? And I'm going to do as f again. And I'm going to say with, oh, sorry, we already did that. I'm going to do f dot write output. Okay. So basically what this function is saying, or what this little bit of code is doing, is it's saying, hey, I want you to open up example-output.txt as a writable file. And while it's open, I want you to write the contents of the variable output to it, and then you can close the file. So let's run that. And let's go look at our, oh yeah, see, and it's already updated. We can see that we now have a new file in here, example-output.txt. If we click on that, you can see, oh yeah, look, it's the modified template right there. So if we go to our templates, we can see our template of example.txt, and then we can go to our example output, and you can see that it's the modified version of the template. Okay, awesome. Let's close out these examples. That covers most of the concepts as far as like a Python perspective goes. So we're going to jump right over into defining the template for our iOS device. And you can kind of see that I already have a plan for the things that I want to modify with the template. So one of the things I want to change is the host name. Let's jump over to the 901. Oh, you guys can't see that stuff. It's secret. And in the 901, we can see that the host name is currently change me. So we want to change that with our template. Let's look at what else. Enable LLDP. Let's see if LLDP is currently on. It is not. We want to enable NTP. Let's see if NTP is on. It is not. And we want to create VLAN 10 with an IP address. Let's see if VLAN 10 exists. It does not. If it did exist, it would look much like VLAN 1337 here. Okay. Let's see. We want to create an IP extended access list for VTY. Show access lists. I don't believe there are any on this device. Okay. And we want to modify line VTY. Okay, we can see line VTY. It seems like there's 4 VTYs available. And the exec timeout is currently set for an hour. We got logging synchronous. We've got login local. And we've got transport input none. Okay, so defining a template is something that a lot of people have already done when they've worked with network devices. It's basically just putting the config into a text document. And then, most people are familiar with, in fact, let's just open up a notepad real quick. Most people are familiar with doing like line VTY 0 through 4, and then doing like exec timeout, and then time in minutes, right? Something like that. And then there's a manual effort to go in and find everything with double carets and replace it with what it's supposed to be, right? That's exactly what a template is, and it's exactly how we're going to define one for Python. And I've already defined the template that I want to use, but let's go look at it, and then we can kind of talk about what I did. Okay, so this is the template that I've defined for the iOS device sitting in my rack. Basically, I have all of these things defined. I don't have the whole config defined. I just have the few things that I actually want to change on the device defined. You can see host name, you can see LLDP run, you can see NTP server, you can see the VLAN that I want to add, you can see the extended access list, then you can see the line VTY. You can also see these kind of odd placeholders that I've put in here. Basically, anytime you create placeholders, you want to make sure that when you're actually replacing strings inside of a template, that there's no other way that something else is going to match on them, right? like you can see how this is left bracket, space VLAN, space, right bracket. Say I only used the word VLAN for a placeholder. All of a sudden doing a replace for the word VLAN it becomes like a lot more dangerous, right? Because VLAN could be found anywhere on the device, any type of networking device, right? So we got to use something to make it kind of unique. Anyway, yeah. So this is kind of what we got going on. Everywhere you see a placeholder, basically I'm going to ask the user for like, what would you like to go in this location? The only other thing I want to bring up is you can see that there's a placeholder with the exact same name in two different locations on the config. And that's because this is actually a bit of an efficiency thing, right? Like if I already know what the name of the access list is that I'm defining, then I don't need to ask the user for it twice. I just use that variable twice in my replacement. Okay. So this is basically what your template is going to look like. So let's make sure that's saved. And then let's go into actually kind of working with that template. So I've already got quite a bit of code here, but basically, if you remember from the concept introduction, we briefly went over what like an input was. So you can see this first block of code that I have is just all of the values that are in the template, and I'm asking the network administrator or whoever they are what they want those values to be in their configuration. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. I want the new host name to be dev ASR 901. I'm going to point the NTP server to my router. I want the new VLAN to be a VLAN 10. I want its IP address to be 10.0.0.1. I want the mask to be 255.255.255.0/24. Make the VTY name simple. For the ACL, I'm going to do 192.168.88.0. And we're going to do a /24 wildcard. And the exec timeout, I'm actually going to increase this to 2 hours just because I can. And for the transport input, I just want it to be SSH. Okay. So if we look at all the values I just put in, and we compare that with the template, we can kind of see like where those values are going to fit in. Like the dev ASR 901 should go here. My router should go here. VLAN 10 should go here. 10.0.0.0 or 10.0.0.1 should go here. That /24 mask should go here. VTY here. VTY here. 192.168.88.0 with a /24 wildcard. We should see 120 go here, and then we should see transport input of SSH go here. Okay. So let's actually run those replacements now. But in order to run those replacements, we have to read that file in as a template that we can actually modify, right? So in order to do that, we're going to do what we did before with the introduction of the concept. We're going to say, hey, open data templates, iOS template.txt as a read file. And while it's open, store its contents to template. Okay, so let's do that real quick. But let's go ahead and read in the template. And now take a look at what template actually equals. We're going to do it with a print statement because that's a bit cleaner. Okay, cool. So now we can see what our template looks like. So like we did in the concept introductions, let's make the output equal the template. And let's just real quick actually add another cell where we print the output so we can see that it looks like the template. Okay, and it does. So if you remember also from the concept introduction where we did the output equals output.replace, and then we chose a placeholder, and then we chose what we wanted to replace it with. So now this concept is very similar, except when we're choosing what we want to replace it with, we're actually choosing a variable that's already stored. And if you remember these variables, these are actually the user input variables that we stored. So when we asked the user, hey, what should the router name be? We stored that value to a variable called hostname. And when we asked them, hey, what should the NTP server be? We stored that value to a variable which is called NTP server. So now when we're doing the replacements in the config, we're saying, hey, when you find this placeholder, replace it with what the user wants. When you find this placeholder, replace it with what the user wants. When you find this placeholder, replace it with what the user wants. And we just do that all the way down. So let's run this in order to do all the replacements in our output variable. And now let's look at what the template and the output look like side by side again. Okay, we can see the template still has all of its placeholder values. And we can see now that the output has all of the values that are requested by the user. Okay, we can even see the exec timeout of 120. We can see the access class of VTYIN with the access class being defined right here. Okay, so if we wanted to right now, we could actually take this and we could copy it from this browser, and we could go and paste it into the configuration of that 901. But I still want to output this data to an actual output file that I can reference later. So if you remember, we're going to do a with open, then we're going to target data, output, and then we're going to create a new file. This new file is going to be titled dev-asr901.txt, and we're going to give it write functionality. And we're going to say, hey, while that file is open, go ahead and write the variable output to it. And if you remember, this is what output looks like. Okay, so let's run this. And then let's go and look and see if our file exists. Okay, hey, there it is. We can see dev ASR 901 and click on that. And we can see the configuration that we're looking for. Okay, so let's copy this. And let's go put it in that 901. Config, terminal. Now let's paste it in. Oh, wow, look at that. Worked so much better. Okay, so you can see the hostname went in, and you can see as soon as that hostname command went in, hostname changed. Anyway, you can see that all of these settings have changed, right? So we can actually do like a show run pipe beg, line VTY. We can see our line VTY now looks how we want it to look. We can see our NTP server command got in there as well. Let's do a show LLDP just to make sure that is running. Let's do a show NTP status. The clock is unsynchronized, but that's expected because I'm not actually running an NTP server on my router. Let's do a show run int VLAN 10. There's VLAN 10. It's shut down, which is fine because I'm not actually doing anything with it. But yeah, anyway, that is basically how you would do a basic config replacement mechanism in Python. So this is all really cool when you look at it in Jupyter, but Jupyter is kind of weird because you can run the code non-linearly. I mean, you still theoretically are running it non-linear, but you can kind of bounce around and you can see how these numbers increment. So like if I ran this print statement, you can see how it's 39, but now it's 46. And you can see that the last one I ran was 45 all the way down here. So it's still running linear, but it's not as straightforward that it's running linear. So what I want to do is I actually want to take all of these concepts and I want to put them into an actual Python script. And we'll just do that real quick. I'm going to use VS Code because VS Code's free. But what I have here is basically the same the same folder structure as I do in Jupyter. And we're just going to copy and paste some things. So we're going to take this template and we're going to do, paste it there. I want to keep this open. Okay, I'm going to do a Control S to save that. And then as far as this, this Python file goes, this is an actual .py file. So this is a Python script. We're just going to kind of like peruse through this Jupyter notebook in a linear fashion and paste in everything that's in it. I'm going to leave out the print statements just because I don't really need them. They're more for kind of just showing how data is getting manipulated. Okay, so basically what we have is this first section is going to be the user defining all the variables that they need to replace the placeholders in the template. The second section is opening up the template and assigning it to a variable. And then we're going to take the output and make it equal to template. And then we're going to modify output. And we're going to basically run a bunch of replace statements. And these replace statements are exactly like if you were to do a find and replace on Notepad, right? It's just kind of a different abstraction than doing it like through a GUI. And then after we've performed all those replacements, we're going to actually write that output variable to a file. Okay, so if we actually run this, let's see. And so this is kind of tiny, but we're just going to run with it. You can see it's requesting the router name. So I'm going to actually do dev2 ASR 901. And then I'm just going to make these values the same as we did before. Okay, so as soon as I finished inputting these all this user input, this file up here actually got created. It wasn't there until I finished finishing all this user input. Because basically, as soon as I did this transport input line, the rest of this code just ran, and it runs pretty fast. So let's take a look at what it output. And yeah, so now you can see the new configuration basically output. But yeah, this is what more or less like a user would see if you ran this basic configuration template code. Is they would see it open up in some type of command prompt or whatever they were running it from. They'd be requested for the input. They'd supply the input, and then you would kind of hope that you had some more verbosity in there, like, hey, I just wrote this file to this folder location, things like that just kind of make the user's life easier. But nothing we're going to deal with in this session. There's also better ways to do this replacement. I didn't want to get into other variable types like dictionaries in this video, but just know there's better ways to do the replacements in files. I also want to bring up that we're not doing any type of checking for valid input data. So the user can really input whatever they want in this case, and we're not going to tell them no. Either way, we're going to spit out a configuration that has their user inputs in it. So if the user wanted to come in here and put in like, haha, this is not an IP, there's nothing stopping them from doing that. And we're going to talk about data form validity checking in another video. But we're going to leave that out of the scope of this video. We're just going to assume that all of the users are just awesome, and there's no reason for us to check for any form validity or anything like that. But anyway, yeah, I think that covers all of the concepts I wanted to cover in this video. Appreciate you guys hanging out, watching. Like and subscribe. And hopefully there's a few others in this series. Thank you. Bye.